and welcome to the Archaeological Society of Delaware's Digging Delaware series. Here, I'll be speaking with Delaware archaeologists about their experiences and how they got into archaeology. My name is Curtis McCoy, and I'm the current president of the Archaeological Society of Delaware. Today, I'll be speaking with Delaware archaeologist and our Sussex County Chapter president, Ed Otter. So welcome, Ed. Why don't you start us off with a little background on who you are?
Hi, I'm Dr. Ed Otter. I own a cultural resource consulting firm based in Salisbury. Work all over the peninsula and anywhere else they'll pay me to go. Product of the Delaware school system. I went to University of Delaware, got my master's and my PhD from Catholic University, and been doing archaeology forever.
Well, our first question is, what made you want to become an archaeologist?
Probably, well, I was always interested in history and Indians ever since I was a kid. And when I got to high school, I found a couple books in the library. One of them was Glob's book of the Bog People, and the other was God's Graves and Scholars by C.W. Saran. And after those books, there was nothing else. I got to the point where I found a dump on my grandfather's farm up in Pennsylvania, and I said, well, I can't dig this. I don't know how. I haven't been trained yet. So it's still up there.
I feel like we all get started in somewhat similar ways. I can remember digging through some trash piles on the farm growing up. So
yeah, I found very few arrowheads as a kid. I do remember some. My grandfather would pick a couple out of his garden, and he had a colonial house on his farm. I barely remember. I actually listed that as an archaeological site with the state once I got to that point. But he had a lot of stuff out on the farm, and I'd go out and look anyway.
Well, in a minute or less, what's some of your current research?
Well, business has been good the last few years, so I basically try to keep up with all of the contracts that I get. But my personal research, what's really got me going, is late woodland across the peninsula. We got into a project in Lewis, the Groom project, where we got some incredible features, late woodland features. One dates about 1280, one about 1400, and another about 1520. And they're full of shell, full of organics. We've got some corn in these features. And I've been working on other projects from Cape Charles up into Delaware where I've got comparable time periods. So I'm beginning to get a new interpretation of the late woodland, excuse me, the late woodland on the peninsula. The village layouts, and the settlement patterns and things like that. Looking at those real hard to see how I think that it falls out now that I've got more data, and as I get more data from analyzing the Groom project stuff.
Yeah, that's always great, being able to get a wide view of a region.
People don't realize it, but the Delaware Peninsula is huge. So from Cape Charles to Lewis you actually have seasonal differences. I mean, they start growing things down there 2 weeks sooner than we do up here. So the salt water is different, the fresh, salinity. So the plants can be different. You can get, there are references to Spanish moss on the lower peninsula back in colonial days, but not this far up. So all these things come into play. The shellfish resources, from the clams to the oysters and other types, varies across the peninsula, from the bay side to the ocean side, from the north to the south. So all of that is a factor, and if you don't consider all of that and try to amalgamate it into a single monolith of whatever, it's just not going to give you a proper interpretation.
Well said. With that, what is one of your best or worst field stories that you've had?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, is there ever really a bad day if you're doing archaeology? Even if your boots freeze to the asphalt, like happened at the, we were working a project in DC, and it was so cold they had dug these huge excavated units with backhoes because there were layers of fill, and the ground wasn't frozen down there. So you dig the shovel full of dirt out, throw it to the screen, and it would freeze on the way to the screen. So, I mean, we were still finding stuff. So it wasn't a bad day, but really not a good day either. Everyone's had their poison ivy and their ticks and the chiggers up and down both legs and all that stuff. But still, if you're doing archaeology, that's not a bad day. Good days, I mean, the Groom project was awesome. Yeah. The features, the crew. I really can't say anything bad about that. I guess all of us have, found really cool stuff. I got to work on the DeBrock. So, finding gold coins and whole ketchup bottles and packaging the collection of shoes that's now one of the world-class 18th century shoe collections. So, there's just lots of stuff, but every day's a great day.
Well, that kind of actually brings us into our next question is, rather than necessarily what's the coolest thing you've ever found, but what's the coolest thing you've ever learned from a project?
And that's probably the hardest one because it's cumulative. What you learned last year on a project, all of a sudden comes around and your new project ties into it, and you've just learned it all over again, and you've got new stuff, and it's like, wow. So, and just so much, and it's both archival and field work. So I don't know, like I said, that's probably the hardest question that you could ask. The amount of erosion in 2 years knocked my socks off. The Groom project probably has 3 to 5 feet of soil missing.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. At Hansell House, the wind has been depositing sediment from elsewhere around the house, and I was 3 feet down and I found a Teflon frying pan. So it's not just, well, if it blows out of here, it's gotta land somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So that was a case where it was depositing, and that's how quickly it deposited. 30, 40 years, 3 feet of sediment.
Wow.
So, I mean, and you can do that all day long. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't know they had that here. White salt glazed stoneware on the western shore of Maryland. It's like, whoa, we found white salt glazed stoneware, scratch blue. And you go to Lewis, it's like scratch blues everywhere. It's like, so there's these subtle differences that, are really, they're fascinating academically. And we got 3 nodes of inflection on the peninsula in the historic period that makes a huge difference on what you're going to find on the sites. So all of that.
Well put. Well, our last question for you today is actually, how are you staying sane during this pandemic?
I've never been accused of that. So in a lot of ways, nothing's really changed. Mm-hmm. I get up in the morning, I go to work, and I eat and go to bed. If I get any time and the weather's okay, I go out and work on my garden. So that's pretty much it.
Well, thank you, Ed, for joining us. Please join us next time for our next episode of Digging Delaware.
All right, thanks.